Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, the weekly radio show to uncover and unlock the entrepreneurial skills in your business. In this week's show, Introvert Myth of the Week. Introverts are rude. Really? Tip of the Week. Getting your quieter team members into the chat. And a discussion with Yvonne Guerino, the human alchemist. Yvonne helps progressive leaders develop positive relationships and powerful teams through self-awareness, skill and confidence building. But just before speaking to Yvonne, a thought. As a leader, you want your team to get on. Problem is when some of them don't seem interested in general conversations. How can you go about getting your quieter team members talking? Chances are that those who chat less readily are introverts. Introverts do like to talk. Make it meaningful and safe so they'll join in. 73% of introverts I've surveyed said they don't like small talk, where only 25% of extroverts dislike it. Why? It's boring. There's no point. Introverts prefer deeper conversation, probably with smaller number of friends around them. Introverts tend not to like big egos, and small talk is quite often full of ego. And those who appear to love small talk often talk about themselves and their successes, which is a big turn-off for most introverts who value humility. Of course, there's a fear of being caught out. Most introverts process their thoughts internally, where extroverts process externally. Add that to an introverted desire to provide a more correct and detailed answer, and it can appear you're answering more slowly. This can lead to the introvert feeling bad if they don't have an instant answer. 4 ideas to help. Accept. Make it easy for everybody to join in when they're ready. Prime the discussion. If a conversation is to move beyond the weather, you probably need to give something of yourself away. Introverts are more likely to open up if you do first. Make it meaningful. And search for stories. Be more open-ended. Rather than going, "How are you?" which leads to "okay," perhaps you could start with, "What was the most interesting thing about?" If you'd like to download a short guide on small talk, especially on Zoom, go to introvertingbusiness.co.uk/smalltalk, or one word for the small talk. Do let me know what tip you'd like to help you activate the entrepreneurial skills in your business, or what introvert myth you'd like exposed. Drop me an email, give me a call, or add it as a comment to your review on the iTunes store. I would love to hear from you. But now, it's time for Yvonne. Welcome, Yvonne.
Hi John, nice to be here.
Just before we start diving into positive relationship in teams, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And perhaps more importantly, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I've asked myself this question many times over the years because I do think introversion and extroversion sits on a continuum and we move up and down it depending on who we're with and what we're doing. I know that I would prefer to talk and be with people than to be alone, so I know I steer more towards the extroverted side. Having said that, around certain people, I will go quieter and be more reflective, and I certainly go looking for time on my own as well. For me, introversion and extroversion are the two sides of the same coin. You can't be both at the same time, but the coin doesn't exist with just one or the other. So you're either on the extrovert side, being taking your energy from the outside world, from other people around you, or you're on the introvert side of the coin and you're reflecting, consolidating your thoughts internally and taking your energy from within. And I think you're only really a complete person if you do a bit of both. But yes,
brilliant.
I have a preference. I do have a preference.
I love the coin analogy, but all of us have some, can learn tactics to help us be more like we need to be at different times, whether that's about being able to speak up more or perhaps to shut up more, but we can learn those tactics, and I think that's really important. Positive relationships in teams, and looking at the HR perspective, where do you see the issues around introversion in businesses and teams?
I think schools and workplaces are all geared up in the same way. that people have decided, because there is evidence obviously to support it, that working together and collaborating is a good thing. And therefore, the schools already start by suggesting we should have teamwork and stand up and present and get involved and do things together, and works the same. People encourage actively extroverted activity. So I think business as a whole, bring people together, get people to talk, encourage teamwork, and therefore in many ways they're encouraging an extroverted way of operating. Where the introvert then loses out, I think, is that there's not often, in a rushed, fast-paced environment, time for what the introverts do extremely well, which is prepare and reflect. So introverts tend to bring the best benefits in an organization in preparation before something is done, and in the reflection and consolidating after something is completed, and in the thinking, the time that has to go on between decision-making processes. When time is short, I think it's the introvert that gets shortchanged. Or the introverted skills that get shortchanged. And it's not because people want to do it necessarily, it's just that when they're in a hurry, particularly when the extrovert's in a hurry to get stuff done and to talk about things, it's just forgotten. And if there's no introvert in a position of authority or who is able to and encouraged to speak up and promote that way of operating, that can be left behind.
What then are the downsides of that we're in a rush and you have an extroverted person pushing things through, if I paraphrase what you just said?
What then happens is that the things that often come naturally from taking time, like contingency planning, thinking everything through from every possible angle, reflecting about the consequences on individual people and circumstances and what may happen, what may not happen, and what went wrong and what went right and what we could do better, and all those sorts of activities are the things that lose out. So what happens is things perhaps are more, I don't want to say rushed, because it's not always rushed, but it's not always as well considered, and we don't always learn as well from the lessons. An extrovert's much more likely to have a go and see what happens. They're often through the starting blocks before they've really realised which direction they're running in. I'm not saying this is across the board, but that tends to be the stereotype. And then stereotypically at the other end, people would say, oh, well, the problem is if we wait for the introverts, we'll never get going because they'll have planned it to death and we won't have started. So somewhere in between is the glorious midpoint of reality, which is, yes, you've got to get going, but don't run off too quick without your shoes on. It's that kind of, and then you get halfway down, you realise it's something you've forgotten.
So the important thing then is this balance between, well, as you put it, the speed versus the decision making. Do you see that some behaviours from leaders in teams particularly are conducive to not getting the most from introverts in their team?
I think what leaders sometimes forget when they have an introvert or several introverts in their team or their population is that you have to ask. Introverts are not, again, stereotypically, depends on who you are and what environment you're in, they're not as likely to push themselves forward. They're more likely to let the extroverts talk and act first, consider, reflect, decide where they stand and speak up when they're good and ready or when they're asked. If you don't ask, you don't necessarily get. And where the leaders do it well, they make sure they include, they give time, they listen, they probe a bit deeper to see where someone's coming from. If they're not aware of the way an introvert's more likely to operate, then they may forget to ask, not give time for them to consider and give a fair answer, or just brush something off that actually needs further debate. And as in my experience, the introverts who have not been encouraged, supported and promoted to be that way are then more likely to go, oh, fine, I'll just keep quiet. They don't want to hear me anyway.
I think that's very true. I'm sure you've worked with some introverted leaders as well as extroverted leaders. Do you see the same kind of behaviours from both? In other words, is the issue, as you implied earlier, the leadership model or the business model in the society we have?
I think it's probably a combination. I've certainly seen introverted leaders who are extremely successful because their style encourages the introverted way of working. as long as they don't stifle the extroverts. So if they're constantly holding everything back, what will happen is the extroverts will start to feel that nothing's happening and nothing's going anywhere, or they can't interact and they can't do, and then they'll pull back. It works both ways. You can stifle an introvert, but you can stifle an extrovert. I do think culture plays a huge part. I mean, if an organization as a whole is very extroverted orientated, then an introverted leader might be told he's underperforming or she's under-delivering because they're not behaving in an extroverted way. And of course, if that introvert is being critiqued for their excellent leadership that is more introverted in style, then they're being encouraged away from that kind of leadership.
That's a really good point. One that I'd love to explore more, but I think we don't have time for today. Would you give a tip for introverted people in teams, perhaps to be heard more in the team?
I think to be heard more, the important thing is to spot the positives and the opportunities first. It's not uncommon for an introvert to say, yes, the problem is this, or yes, but what about? And often to somebody who isn't in the same place, that will just sound like critique, obstacle and hindrance, and they'll try and brush it off.
Like that, thank you. And how about flipping it the other way then? A tip for a non-introvert who's leading a team or wants to get more from their team?
I think the important thing is to listen and to really listen, and also to support them in a group. So if an introvert looks like they want to speak out, to notice it and to stop other people talking over them. To stop other people stifling the introvert.
Yvonne, I am absolutely sure that some of the listeners will want to get back in touch with you. What's the best way they can do that?
I'm active on LinkedIn. You just look for Yvonne Guérineau. If spelling the Guérineau is too tricky, the website has a contact page. And I think you'll put the website on the link, won't you?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time. It's been wonderful chatting to you.
Thank you for letting me talk.
And now it's time for Introvert Myth of the Week. Those crazy stories that I hear and you hear, but some people actually believe. Introverts are rude. Really? Is that ruder than people who talk a lot and talk over others in their need to assert themselves? Oops, almost a mini rant there after watching some of the political discussions this week as we gained a new president of the free world. Not that that title ever made sense to me. But before I say anything rude, let's get back to the introverts are rude myth. No, they're not. That is, they're no ruder than anybody else. Where does it come from? Introverts often don't see a reason for beating around the bush with social pleasantries. It's that dislike of small talk again. They want everyone to just be real and honest. Unfortunately, this isn't always acceptable and it can come across as rude. And the second thing is their energy, which can drain faster than an old Nokia 3010 phone battery, can suddenly leave them needing to leave the conversation, especially, out of interest, on Zoom. Perhaps we all just need to be a bit more tolerant of each other in these tough times. Now, there's a thought for the week. Thank you for listening to Activate Your Introvert, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I'd love to see your reviews on the iTunes store. Thank you once again, and catch up with you next week.